This $115 sleeping pad only weighs 650 grams, but advertises the warmest R value I've ever seen at 8.8. At half the price of the X-Therm and the Tensor Extreme Conditions, is the price too good to be true? And could that advertised 8.8 R value actually become dangerous and misleading for people in winter camping conditions? I'm out in the Canadian Rockies with temperatures forecasted to get down to minus 12 degrees Celsius tonight with the potential for some snow. In order to test 7 pieces of winter camping gear that seem great on paper, but are also very affordable. I'll be putting the gear to the test to see if it can handle winter conditions, but also assessing whether it's worth the price. I'm always a little nervous testing budget gear because it often has a higher chance of either not performing or just outright failing. And when I'm out in winter conditions like this, I have to be a little bit more careful because the consequences of a key piece like my sleeping pad or my down insulation not performing can have pretty dire consequences. Because of that, I'm only steps from my car on purpose, because if things go bad and I have to pull the plug, then it's really easy for me to just pack up and head home. I also brought 3 different sleeping pads with me. The previously mentioned Nature Hike pad with the R value of 8.8. I also have a Hikenture pad that only costs $80 and has an R value of 6.2, and then a Light Tour pad that has an R value of 7.5. I'm also going to be testing out this very affordable down jacket, as well as a pot and a stove. Like I said, the temperature tonight is forecasted to get down to minus 12 degrees Celsius, and I'm on frozen ground with a light little dusting of snow over top of it, so it should be really good conditions for testing these pads in conditions that they should be able to handle, but nothing too extreme. My plan is to first A/B test the pads with the lower R value. We have the Hikenture in the dark color there, and then the Light Tour pad in the light color. Like I said, Hikenture has an R value of 6.2, and then the Light Tour has an R value of 7.5. Over the course of the evening and as it gets dark, I'll lay my sleeping bag out, lay on both these pads, and just see if they're able to keep me warm under these conditions. Whichever one is seeming to be the coldest, I'll then substitute that one out for the Nature Hike pad with an R value of 8.8 in order to A/B test those 2 sleeping pads over the course of the entire night. There's really 2 things I want to be testing on this trip. The first one, obviously we've already talked about, and that's whether these pads can keep me warm in winter conditions, because I'm a little bit skeptical of whether they're going to live up to the R values based on their price tags and kind of the reputation of the brands that make these pads. The second thing I want to test is comfort, because I don't find the Tensor Extreme Conditions or the X-Therm that comfortable due to the horizontal baffling system. But both the Nature Hike and the Light Tour use this kind of dimpled baffling system. Then the Hikenture uses a similar baffling system to the Tensor Extreme with kind of a horizontal baffle that's kind of modified with a little bit of dimpling through it. The down jacket that I'm testing out is Decathlon's update to the MT900 down jacket. It costs $200 in the US, weighs just over 600 grams, but you can get it for a lot cheaper outside the US. And there's some very important kind of modifications and updates that they made to the jacket. Some things I like and some things that I don't like. Let's go over all the updates that Decathlon made with this jacket, as well as some of the things that stayed the same. The biggest thing that stayed the same is that it's using sewn through baffling still, so it's not going to be as warm as a box baffle down jacket. Those kind of jackets are going to allow you to get down to extreme conditions. Decathlon advertises this jacket as being warm down to minus 5 degrees Celsius if you're in static conditions. I think it actually could be much warmer than that. It's about minus 6, minus 7 degrees Celsius right now, and I'm toasty warm with just a base layer and then a thin Alpha Direct sweater on top. And that's basically what I'm going to be wearing for both the down jacket testing and the sleeping pad testing. A really thin synthetic base layer, and then Alpha Direct pants and Alpha Direct sweater, as well as some really warm socks. The other thing that stayed the same with this jacket is that it still uses a relatively low fill power down, something that's going to be affordable. That's what keeps the price of this jacket down. And then a shell material that's nothing special, but it gets the job done. Decathlon also maintained the slightly waterproof shoulders and hood, but then also added some waterproofing to the cuff, which is nice if you're kind of digging around snow. That this is a part of the jacket that sometimes gets a little bit wet, so it's nice to see it have some waterproofing now. But the biggest changes with this jacket came with zippers and where the zippers are. First of all, there's no more pit zips on the MT900, which I'm kind of torn about. First of all, it decreases the weight and allows them to put that weight into some other places, but it was really nice to have those zippers if you're kind of overheating. Maybe you were putting your jacket on when you got to camp and then you started setting up your tent up, started getting a little bit warm. You could undo the pit zips and dump some heat very easily. But instead, there's now 2 chest zippers right here and then some more pockets on the inside. And I love chest pockets in the wintertime because it allows you to store things in a place that's gonna keep things warm. So if you have battery banks, in reaches, cell phones, chest pockets are a great place for them. And then on the inside, you get 2 drop pockets on the left-hand side and then 1 drop pocket on the right-hand side. And those are great for putting mitts or just other things that you want to keep warm, maybe a water bottle or something like that. But the big questions are, is the jacket going to keep me warm tonight? How low can I go with this jacket? And then the second thing is, are the features they added useful, and do I miss any of the features that they took away? I'll let you guys know as I'm testing it out throughout the evening and then tomorrow how it did and what my final thoughts are. The sleeping bag that I'm going to be using for the testing is the Thermarest Polar Ranger. This thing's rated to -30, so it's definitely not going to be the weak link when testing the sleeping pads. And I'm going to lay on my back, compress all the insulation underneath the sleeping bag, and then get a really good test of the pads. All the pads are also fully inflated, and I'll keep them inflated basically as firm as they can get because that maximizes R value and is going to provide the most amount of insulation. It's still a little early for dinner, so I'm going to take off my down jacket, my snow pants here, hop into my sleeping bag, and do a little preliminary testing of these 2 pads and see which one I'm going to be dropping in favor of the Nature Hike for my overnight sleeping. So I spent the last hour A/B testing the Hike-Enter pad and the Light Tour pad and had some interesting results. Kind of what I was expecting, but not really what I was hoping for. Something to note is that all 3 pads use reflective insulation. So there's layers of Mylar film suspended inside these pads, and that's what's providing the insulation. So as you're laying on the pad, you're producing heat, and then the reflective insulation inside the pad is reflecting that heat back to you. So there's nothing like down insulation or sheets of synthetic insulation here. It's just that Mylar film. And with the Light Tour pad, which has an R value of 7.5, I was able to feel that heat being reflected to me. I was pretty warm. I was toasty warm. I wasn't feeling any cold from this pad. Whereas with the Hike-Enter pad, when I spent 30 minutes on it, I was feeling heat loss into the ground through the pad, and I was feeling cold. And that was a little bit surprising. 6.2 R value should be fine in these kind of conditions. So I was expecting it to be warm enough. So that's a little bit disappointing, especially because it is the cheapest pad that I'm testing at $80 and really had high hopes for it. But it's cool to see the Light Tour performing, and doing an A/B test with the Nature Hike tonight is going to really provide a lot of good information on whether these affordable pads are living up to their R value. So I'm going to substitute the Nature Hike into the tent for the A/B testing overnight. And what's interesting with the Nature Hike is that it's an overall bigger pad than either the Light Tour or the Hike-Enter. It's quite a bit thicker, and then it's a long, wide, rectangular pad. So a lot more surface area on top that needs to be insulated, as well as a lot of surface area on the side of the pad that needs to be insulated as well. But that extra thickness could provide a lot of comfort, and right now there are not a lot of good comfort options for winter sleeping pads. It's not quite dinner time yet, but I'm gonna go get water from the stream that's just down this way before it gets too dark, because I don't wanna be slipping and getting wet, because I'll be in pretty big trouble. Even though I have my car right there, you don't wanna be getting wet in wintertime. And in order to get the water, I'm gonna be using another one of the pieces of gear that I'm testing out on this trip. It's a 2-liter titanium pot from Tom Shoe. I find 2 liters to be kind of the perfect amount for winter camping because you can really melt a lot of snow inside the pot. But this one is a little bit more compact than the other pot that I usually use, the Toaks 2-liter pot. And that's because it has 2-liter capacity right up to the brim, whereas the Toaks capacity is about 3/4 full. So it's actually a little bit bigger than 2 liters. And I like the slightly more compact nature of the Tom Shoe pot over the Toaks pot. And then one other thing that I really like about it is the handle. So the Toaks pot has kind of a bail handle that I have to use in order to pour the water out, and it can be a little bit precarious. With this handle and the spout that's on the end here, I can pour water really easily into my Nalgene or a freeze-dry meal. And what's awesome about this is I don't need to bring a bag or elastic or anything like that, because as soon as I put the lid on top, I can just fold this handle on top and lock everything in place. And I love that kind of storage capability of the handle, and the fact that the handle also just makes the pot easier to use. Anytime you could take advantage of running water and not have to melt snow, it's definitely worth it, and I'm definitely going to take advantage of this creek here. And while the pot's exciting, especially with that handle feature there, what I'm really excited to test out is this Martin winter stove. So what makes it a winter stove is the fact that it has a preheating tube. And it's really interesting how that works. When it's really cold out, fuel inside of a canister is mostly liquid. There's a little bit of propane in a lot of them, and that propane doesn't turn to liquid until -40 degrees Celsius. So what you do is you attach the stove to the canister, and then you leave it right side up, and then that propane goes through the tube and then through the preheating tube and then out the top, and you can light that and then heat up the preheating tube. And then once that tube is heated up, you can turn the canister upside down and then start running liquid through it, because once that liquid heats the preheating tube, it's going to get warmed up, turn to gas, and then be usable by the stove. Good winter stoves are pretty hard to come by, and this one is very inexpensive at $25. It only weighs 155 grams, and there's going to be some big questions about whether it can actually perform and use the liquid fuel in here, because some of these stoves, the preheating tube isn't really implemented properly, and the stoves end up sputtering and shooting fuel everywhere, and there's a chance that I might catch on fire again. So a little bit excited, a little bit nervous to test this out once I start getting dinner going. It's starting to get dark, the moon's out right now, and I'm feeling a little bit of a chill. I'm tracking the temperature using this Bluetooth thermometer right now, and I'll be doing the same overnight, seeing how cold it gets. And the jacket, I think -5, -10 is probably the limit. Like I said, I don't have a ton of layers under here, just a thin base layer and then Alpha Direct. If I threw a fleece sweater on, I'd probably be feeling quite a bit warmer right now. So something to think about. You can probably get down to -20 with this jacket with a 3-layer system underneath it. I'm starting to get a bit hungry, so let's get the water boiling so I can rehydrate my freeze-dried meal. If the stove is put together properly, I shouldn't have any problems, but if it has some issues, which I half expect with a $25 stove, then this might be a bit of a problem. Okay, so step 1. There we go, no problem. Get that heating tube nice and warmed up. And I usually do this for about 30 seconds. That usually gets the preheating tube nice and toasty. All right, that's looking pretty good. So let's invert the canister and try not to catch on fire. There we go, a little bit of sputtering. Let's turn this up a little bit more. So the stove is pulsing, it sputtered a little bit, and part of the reason that might be happening is the preheating tube might be too narrow, so the diameter of it is too narrow, and it's not letting enough liquid through in order to create enough gas in order to really operate in optimum kind of capacity. So we'll let it keep sputtering, or not sputtering, pulsing. We'll put the water on and see how long this takes, because it really shouldn't take too long with a full power stove. It's 5:25 right now, so let's see how this goes. So I'm kind of realizing that there's just way too much water in here for this stove, so I'm gonna do something which should help. I'm gonna pour what's in here right now, as much as I can, into my Nalgene, get down to 500 milliliters or so, and then try and get that up to a boil, because that's all I need for my freeze-dried meal. And that's my priority right now, is getting my freeze-dried meal rehydrated, because I am starving. So we got a boil kind of going here, but I'm gonna call it, because it's been 30 minutes, including the time with the pot kind of semi-emptied, down to 500, 600 milliliters or so. I have 800 mils in here actually, so a little bit more than I thought. I definitely don't want to pour all of it in here. Probably about 500 mils should do it. Give it a little stir. And then with this jacket, the big internal pocket on the left-hand side is perfect for sliding in a freeze-dried meal and keeping it nice and warm as you rehydrate it. As my meal rehydrates, I'm gonna take a load off. Just relax a little bit in the super peaceful, beautiful, wintry backcountry. My meal should be ready to go here, so I'm gonna get eating. As for the stove and pot, I think the pot is a big win. I still want to test it out a little bit more, especially from a reliability standpoint with the handle, and then the lid is a little bit tight for my liking, but I think I can make it work. The stove, basically a fail. The stove, I will never take this stove out again. I'll just throw it in the garbage, because I wouldn't even give it away to somebody to use, because it just doesn't work. It would have taken me hours if I even had enough fuel in the canister to boil 1.6 liters of water. And yeah, not a good winter stove, and I doubt it'd even be a good summer stove. I've been sitting around for a while now, eating dinner, just hanging out around camp. The temperatures dropped down a little bit below where it was before, down to minus 12 degrees Celsius now. And the updated MT900 has been keeping me comfortable. I'm not toasty warm, but I'm not freezing either. So for that reason, I'm gonna say the warmth rating for the Decathlon MT900 is a little bit conservative at -5. I think you can take it down to -10 pretty comfortably. And then like I said, if you added a fleece underneath, you could probably get down to -20 comfortably, but not toasty. And that just leaves the sleeping pads. I'm a little bit disappointed that the Hikenture pad wasn't as warm as I would have thought it would be for a 6.2 R value, but I'll get it out in some shoulder season conditions, something a little bit warmer, and see if it's okay there, because for the price tag and the comfort, I think it could be a good option for a lot of people out there. But what I'm really excited for is tonight's test of the Nature Hike and Light Tour pads, because the Light Tour, at just a little bit more expensive than the Hikenture, still under $100, could be a phenomenal buy if it ends up keeping me warm tonight. And then the Nature Hike could be that kind of golden ticket for a pad that is both good in the winter, but also comfortable. So fingers crossed, these two pads perform tonight, because they could be great options for winter camping, as long as they end up being reliable in the long run. Because that's the other concern with budget gear. Even if it performs, if it's not reliable, especially in the wintertime, then it's not something I want to be bringing out. I'm just going to keep enjoying wintertime in the beautiful Canadian Rockies, and I'll check in tomorrow and let you guys know how the sleeping pads performed. Good morning. That was not the most comfortable night that I've ever had. Overall, I'm not quite sure what to think and what to take away from my experience sleeping on these two pads last night, but let's jump into how they slept, how warm they were, and how comfortable they were, and you guys can help me decide whether these two pads are any good. I started off sleeping on the Nature Hike because this is the one that I was most excited about due to that comfort factor. But after an hour of sleeping on it, I was really cold. I can just get that out of the way right away. It was a cold sleeping pad last night. I did revisit it 3 hours before kind of sunrise and spent a couple hours on it, seeing if I could warm it up with my body and actually get a little bit of warmth out of it. But again, it was just sapping heat out of me and feeling really cold. So I would say that the 8.8 R value of the Nature Hike is basically a lie, because it does not sleep as warm as a pad with an R value of 8.8 should sleep. There's a couple reasons I think the Nature Hike might have been sleeping colder than the R value would indicate. It, like I said, uses reflective insulation inside of it, and if that reflective insulation is just in kind of sheets, like it is in the Tensor Extreme Conditions, then a really thick pad like this with a lot of top surface area is going to have a lot of influence from the cold air. Maybe it's able to insulate me from the ground effectively, but with such a big pad, the influence from the air is much more significant than with a smaller, thinner pad. The second factor is that this pad could have a manufacturing defect that's leading it to it sleeping colder, but I just don't really think that's as big of a thing as companies might say. They might say, oh, your pad failed because of a manufacturing defect, but I legitimately think that most of the time it's a design flaw that's leading to the pad not performing. And that's the third factor, is that I think Nature Hike just did not fully take into account all the different variables when they're designing this pad, like the thickness, like the size, and for that reason, we're getting a pad that sleeps a lot colder than the R value would indicate. As soon as I switched to the Light Tour pad, I was noticeably warmer. Maybe that's due to the fact that it's a smaller pad, it's thinner, there's less influence on it from the air, but I think Light Tour might have also implemented the insulation a little bit more effectively as well. The big thing I was keeping an eye on with the Light Tour is how warm is it compared to comparable sleeping pads? How warm is it compared to the X-Therm? How warm is it compared to the Tensor Extreme Conditions? And I can pretty confidently say that it's not as warm as the X-Therm. There's basically no pad on the market as warm as the X-Therm, but it might be getting close to the Tensor Extreme Conditions. The temperature stayed basically minus 12 degrees Celsius from when I went to bed until this morning, and I was not warm on this pad, but not uncomfortable either. Kind of like with the jacket, I kind of was riding that balance of its limits. That being said, even if the Light Tour doesn't live up to the 7.5 R value, it's still a pretty compelling pad at $95 and weighing only 560 grams. This pad is the lightest out of all three of the pads and comparable to pads that have an R value in the 4s, 5s. So you might be getting a pretty good deal with this pad still, as long as you're not trying to take it out into extreme cold. But the reason I switched back from the Light Tour to the Nature Hike is comfort. The Light Tour, even though it has the dimpled baffling system, it's not that significant. You don't get that much pressure relief from it. So I was not that comfortable on the pad. And in the morning, I did switch back to the Nature Hike because this is quite a comfortable pad. The thickness is noticeable. I don't know if the material has some stretchiness to it, but I was definitely feeling a lot of pressure relief. It was just a lot more comfortable pad to lay on than the Light Tour. So you can see why I'm a little bit uncertain on what to think about these pads. The Light Tour, it kept me warm enough, but wasn't probably as warm as that 7.5 R value. And the Nature Hike, while it didn't keep me warm at all, was very comfortable. So I think what I need to do is essentially ignore R value for both these pads as well as the Hike Entra. Let's not forget the Hike Entra because it's still a very affordable pad. And I think that if I ignore R value, then I can kind of assess these pads a little bit more fairly. Let's look at the Nature Hike, for example. If it only has kind of a true R value in the 4s, yet is still very lightweight, very affordable, and then super comfortable, then it could still be a good pad. As long as it's reliable, it would still be a very good pad competing against those pads with an R value of 4. Same with the Hike Entra. At $80, there's nothing really else out there. So if it can keep you warm down to just below freezing and is reliable, then a good pad. And then the Light Tour, if it's able to keep me warm down to minus 10 degrees Celsius and is comfortable enough, but only $95, that's pretty compelling as well. The testing of these 3 pads definitely did not go as expected. I thought I was going to get a little bit more clear results and maybe at least have one that lived up to its R value. So kind of disappointed in that factor, but also excited by the fact that we have some pads that are around $100, under $100 that could still be competing on weight and comfort with other mainstream pads out there. So is budget gear something to consider for wintertime conditions? I think you have to be careful because the reliability factor still isn't proven with any of these pads. And you have to be testing them in controlled environments before taking them out. If I just trusted the specs of any of these pads, went out on a multi-day trip or even a trip that was getting a little bit colder, I would have had a miserable time and I would have been super uncomfortable and it could have potentially been dangerous. So this trip is a good example of how to test gear that you might be a little bit uncertain about. My car was right there. I could have bailed very easily and that definitely upped the safety factor. Even though I end up being a little bit miserable on trips like this, especially when the gear just doesn't perform, I do think it's a great value for you guys, for the community, because even though these pads aren't super expensive, it can be really disappointing to spend $100, $120 on a pad and then it not perform as you expected based on the specs that you're reading. So hopefully you guys enjoyed this video and learned a little bit from my suffering. If you are interested in some other budget backpacking gear, go check out this video right up here. It's my budget backpacking gear award. So I go over a bunch of different gear in different categories like best tent, best pack, best sleeping pad, but all with a budget focus and let you guys know which ones I think are the best.